They told her to wait outside. Not quietly, not politely. Loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Loud enough to make sure she understood exactly where she belonged. The glass walls of the executive lounge at JFK reflected her image back at her. A black woman in a faded grey hoodie. No blazer, no heels, no visible badge of power, just a carry-on bag scuffed at the corners and eyes rimmed with exhaustion. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from inconvenience, but from responsibility, from being awake when others sleep, from decisions that move money people and consequences. Brian Whittaker didn't look at her when he said it. He pointed instead 2 fingers, flicking toward the hallway like he was shooing a stray animal from a clean room. This meeting is for executives, he said. Voice-sharp, practiced American corporate confidence, soaked in entitlement. Maintenance and cleaning staff use the back entrance. You can wait outside until someone needs you. The room went still. Not silent. Still. Chairs stopped creaking. A coffee cup froze halfway to a man's mouth. Someone exhaled through their nose a quiet laugh, then swallowed it when no one else joined in. In America, moments like this don't explode. They suffocate. Rachel Coleman stood where she was. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. Fingers relaxed, nails short. She breathed in through her nose. Slow, controlled. The way people breathe when they are deciding how much damage they are about to do. Brian finally looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes scanned her from the hood of her sweatshirt to the worn leather of her bag. He saw what he wanted to see. Someone tired. Someone out of place. Someone without leverage. His mouth tightened, satisfied. "Do we have a problem?" he asked, already irritated by the possibility that this interaction might take more than 10 seconds. Rachel met his gaze. Her eyes were dark, steady, unblinking. "I'm here for the meeting," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut clean through the air. Brian snorted, a short, dismissive sound. "No, you're not." He glanced back at the table at the men and women seated there. Suits, watches, polished smiles. People who had never been told to wait outside a room they believed they owned. "This is a budget emergency meeting. Board members only." One of the women at the table shifted in her seat. Late 40s. Blonde. HR director energy. She avoided Rachel's eyes, stared instead at her legal pad like the paper might save her from accountability. Rachel felt it. The avoidance. The quiet relief of people who were glad it wasn't them standing there. "I was told to come here," Rachel said. Same calm, same stillness. Brian sighed, loud and theatrical. He checked his watch. A heavy thing, gold-toned, catching the lounge lights. "Listen," he said, lowering his voice, stepping closer. Too close. The smell of stale coffee and peppermint gum drifted into her space. "I don't know who you think you are, but we have real problems today. Real money on the line. If you want to keep your job, you should leave now before security gets involved." Security. The word hung there. A threat dressed as policy. Rachel glanced past him through the glass towards the runway. A private jet sat idling in the rain, its lights blinking, steady and patient. She watched it for half a second. Then she looked back at Brian. "I'll wait," she said. Brian blinked. Not because she agreed, because she didn't sound defeated. "Good," he said quickly, seizing the opening, eager to reclaim control. 5 minutes. Wait outside. If you're still here after that, I'll have you escorted out. 5 minutes. He liked how that sounded. Reasonable? Generous even? Rachel nodded once. A small movement. almost polite. 5 minutes, she repeated. She turned and walked out. Her footsteps were quiet on the carpet. Behind her, the room exhaled. Someone laughed too loud. Brian straightened his jacket, smoothed the front, like a man who believed he had just restored order to chaos. She'd just walked in like she owned the place, he muttered, shaking his head. Unbelievable. No one challenged him. Outside the lounge, Rachel stopped just beyond the glass wall. She could still see them. 12 executives around a polished table. Power posturing. Voices rising, overlapping. People who believed the world bent because they told it to. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. It wasn't flashy. No case. No logo. Just black glass and weight. The kind of phone you don't buy in a store. She typed one message. Activate phase 1. I'm in position. She sent it. The reply came almost instantly. Copy that. Rachel leaned back against the wall, folding her arms loosely. From here she could see Brian at the head of the table, gesturing at a screen filled with red numbers and downward arrows. She could see the fear behind his confidence now, the tight jaw, the forced smile, the way his eyes kept flicking to the door, making sure it stayed closed. He had no idea. None of them did. They didn't know that 3 hours earlier, at 40,000 feet, while the plane's engines hummed and the cabin lights dimmed, Rachel Coleman had signed documents that transferred ownership of Aerolux Airways into her name. Not a controlling interest. Not a stake. The whole thing. They didn't know the press release was scheduled for tomorrow morning, that the lawyers were already billing by the hour, that the regulators had been notified, that the systems they relied on now answered to someone else. They didn't know this meeting was already obsolete. Inside the lounge, the HR director finally spoke. "Should we call security?" she asked, eyes darting toward the glass. Brian waved her off. "No. She'll leave. They always do." Rachel watched him say it. Always. She thought of the airports she'd walked through when no one looked twice, the boardrooms where her credentials were questioned 3 times, the meetings where she was assumed to be the assistant until she sat down at the head of the table. She thought of her mother who used to say, "You learn everything about a man by how he treats people he thinks can't hurt him." Rachel checked the time. 2 minutes had passed. She lifted her gaze to the glass wall and met Brian's eyes through it. Just for a moment. He looked away first, and in that moment something shifted. Subtle. Invisible. Like pressure changing before a storm. The 5 minutes hadn't even begun to hurt yet, and the people inside had no idea that by the time they were over, nothing in their lives would ever be the same. The door didn't lock behind her. It didn't need to. Power rarely announces itself with force. It waits. It watches. Rachel Coleman stood just outside the glass wall, close enough to hear fragments of the meeting bleed through when voices rose, close enough to feel the vibration of authority, pretending it wasn't afraid. The lounge lighting cast long reflections across the polished floor, turning the executives inside into silhouettes. Their movements exaggerated, almost theatrical, like shadows on a screen. Inside, Brian Whittaker had taken his place at the head of the table. He liked that spot. It made him feel taller, important, necessary. He clicked a remote, and the screen behind him filled with charts and percentages, bleeding red. Decline. Loss. Forecasts nobody wanted to own. "We're bleeding," he said, tapping the screen harder than necessary. "Fuel costs are up. Maintenance overruns are killing us. We cut now, or we don't survive the year." Thomas Hale, the acting chief executive, leaned back in his chair. Late 50s, grey hair cut too neatly, a man who had learned how to look calm while other people panicked for him. "We've already cut," he said. "Staff, routes, customer experience." Brian's mouth twisted, then cut deeper. A murmur rippled around the table. Uneasy. Not disagreement. Fear. Everyone in that room understood one unspoken truth. When executives say, "Cut deeper, someone else bleeds." Rachel watched their faces as they spoke. The subtle tells. A clenched jaw. Fingers drumming on wood. A woman pressing her lips together like she was holding back words she had learned never to say out loud in rooms like this. She could read them the way some people read weather. She remembered a different room. Years ago. Smaller. Cheaper chairs. A folding table in a community center basement in Detroit. Her first board meeting. One investor had looked at her and asked if she was lost, if she was sure she was in the right building. She had smiled then, too. Inside the lounge, Linda Parker cleared her throat. Human Resources. The title alone made Rachel's stomach tighten. "We're getting complaints," Linda said, "from staff, from customers, harassment claims, discrimination allegations. If we keep pushing Brian, cut her off with a raised hand. Every airline gets complaints. It's noise." Linda's eyes flicked toward the glass wall, toward Rachel, just for a second, then back down. "It's more than noise," she said quietly. "We have documentation." Brian laughed. Not loud, controlled, the kind of laugh that tells everyone else in the room where the line is. Documentation doesn't ground planes. Cash flow does. Rachel felt the word settle in her chest. Documentation doesn't ground planes. She wondered how many people had been silenced by that logic. How many warnings had been buried because they were inconvenient. She shifted her weight to the fabric of her hoodie, whispering softly. Her phone buzzed once in her hand. Phase 1 complete. Access confirmed. Rachel didn't look at the screen. She didn't need to. She already knew what that meant. Every system inside that room, every badge, every email, every screen they trusted, all of it now answered to her. Inside the meeting pressed on oblivious. "We delay non-essential maintenance," Brian continued, voice firm, confident. "Stretch inspection cycles, push replacements to next quarter. That buys us breathing room." Thomas frowned. "What about safety thresholds?" Brian shrugged. "Thresholds are guidelines. We stay within acceptable risk." Acceptable risk. Rachel tasted the phrase. It had always fascinated her how easily people assigned risk when it wasn't their lives on the line. She remembered standing on a hospital construction site in West Africa months earlier, watching doctors argue over whether a generator could handle one more machine, whether the risk was acceptable. She had written a check that day without hesitation. No meeting, no debate. Some things don't get negotiated. Inside the lounge, someone's phone buzzed. Then another. Then another. Small vibrations at first, easy to ignore. Brian waved a hand. "Put them on silent. We finish this." But the vibrations kept coming. Not loud, persistent, like a pulse. Rachel watched as Thomas checked his phone despite himself, his face drained of color. He straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. "Is something wrong?" Linda asked. Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked at Brian, then at the screen behind him, then back at his phone. His mouth opened, closed. He swallowed. "My email," he said, finally. "It just logged me out." Brian frowned. "What Linda checked hers." "Mine too." A third voice. A fourth. Confusion rippled through the room, now sharp and fast. Brian's confidence wavered just a fraction. He tapped his tablet. The screen went dark. "That's not funny," he snapped, already irritated. IT Rachel pushed off the wall. She took one step forward, stopping just in front of the glass. Her reflection merged with theirs now. Two worlds touching. Inside, the lights flickered. Brian turned toward the door, irritation giving way to something closer to anger. "What is going on?" Rachel lifted her phone. The sound system crackled. Then her voice filled the room. Calm, clear, controlled. "This is Rachel Coleman." The room froze. Brian's head snapped toward the glass. His eyes found her, locked on her like she'd just stepped out of a hallucination. "I was told to wait outside," Rachel continued, "so I am. But while I wait, we're going to make a few adjustments." Thomas stood so fast his chair tipped backward. "Who is this?" he demanded. Rachel didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Authority doesn't come from volume. 3 hours ago, Aerolux Airways was acquired in full by Coleman Global. The transfer cleared while I was in the air. The contracts are filed. The regulators have been notified. As of now, I own the planes, the hangars, the systems, and the decisions. Silence crashed into the room. Brian stared at her through the glass. His mouth moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, "That's not possible," he said. His voice cracked on the word possible. "This is a joke." Rachel tapped her screen. The monitor behind Brian changed. Documents filled the display. Legal seals, signatures, dates, her name, her title. Linda covered her mouth. Thomas sank back into his chair, knees weak. "Blue Horizon Ventures," he whispered. "That was you?" "Yes," Rachel said. It was. Brian's face drained of color. He laughed once, a sharp, brittle sound. "No, no. You don't just walk in here looking like that, and like what?" Rachel asked. The question landed hard. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry. It was precise. Brian's jaw tightened. He glanced around the table searching for support. None came. Rachel stepped closer to the glass. Her eyes didn't leave his. "You told me this room was for people who sign checks. You told me to wait outside until the trash needed to be emptied." Her voice dropped, not softer, heavier. "Well, Brian, the trash is here, and I'm taking it out." Phones chimed again, louder this time, in unison. Access revoked, credentials disabled, cards declined. One by one, the systems they'd built their power on fell silent. Brian staggered back, gripping the edge of the table. "You can't do this," he whispered. "I run this region." Rachel's gaze was cold now. Final. "No," she said. "You ran it." Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the glass like applause from a world that had already decided. Rachel checked the time. 4 minutes had passed. 1 minute remained. And the people inside were finally beginning to understand what waiting really felt like. The room didn't erupt. It imploded. For a few seconds, no one moved. 12 executives sat frozen around a table that suddenly felt too small, too exposed like a raft in open water. The hum of the lounge ventilation seemed louder now. The rain against the glass sounded closer. Brian Whittaker's fingers dug into the wood knuckles, blanching as if the table might float away without him. Thomas Hale found his voice first. It came out hoarse. "There has to be a process," he said, trying to stand, failing, settling back into his chair as if gravity had doubled. "An acquisition like this requires notice, board approval, due diligence." Rachel's reflection in the glass didn't blink. "The process is complete," she said. "Your notice period began 3 hours ago. Your board approval was obtained when the shares transferred. Due diligence uncovered things you should be very concerned about." Linda Parker shook her head, eyes darting from the screen to Rachel, from Rachel to the door. "This is a misunderstanding," she said. Hands open, palms up, a gesture learned over decades of damage control. "We can talk." "We can schedule minute 4, Rachel said. The number cut through them. Brian straightened, suddenly panic hardening into anger. "You can't just hijack a meeting," he snapped. "You don't belong in this room." Rachel took one step closer to the glass, close enough now that Brian could see the faint scar along her left eyebrow. Close enough to see the calm in her eyes wasn't mercy. It was calculation. "You're right," she said. "I don't belong in this room. This room belongs to me." She tapped her phone again. The screen behind Brian changed. Emails. Chains of them. Subject lines blunt and ugly. Delay tire replacement. Push inspection to next quarter. Ignore compliance warning. A low sound escaped someone's throat. Linda covered her mouth again, this time with both hands. Thomas leaned forward, squinting. "Those are internal communications," he said. "Confidential, they were," Rachel replied. "They're evidence now." Brian shook his head hard, as if the motion might dislodge reality. "That's taken out of context," he said. His voice was too loud, too fast. "Everyone does it. It's industry practice." Rachel's eyes never left his. "Flight 402, she said. 180 passengers. You authorized patching a landing gear tire instead of replacing it to save $4,000. The room seemed to tilt. Linda whispered. "Brian," he spun on her. "We were over budget," he snapped. "I did what I had to do." "What you had to do," Rachel said, her voice flattening, "was risk 180 lives, so your quarterly report looked cleaner." She paused. Let it sink in. Let the words find their weight. "I forwarded those emails to the Federal Aviation Administration and the Federal Bureau of Investigation," she continued. "They received them 2 minutes ago." Thomas stood, chair scraping loudly across the floor. "You can't," he said. "This will destroy us." Rachel tilted her head. "No," she said. "This will stop you." Phones buzzed again. Not alerts this time. Calls, missed calls, unknown numbers. Thomas's phone slipped from his hand and hit the table with a dull thud. Brian's legs gave out. He caught himself on the chair, sinking into it, breath shallow. "This is a setup," he whispered. "You planned this." Rachel didn't deny it. "I planned to see who you were when you thought no one important was watching." The glass door to the conference room rattled as someone tried the handle. It didn't open. Electronic locks engaged remotely. A soft click. Final. "Let us out," someone shouted. Rachel didn't move. She turned her back to the glass and faced the terminal beyond. Travelers hurried past, unaware. Rolling bogs, announcements echoing overhead. Life continuing on schedule, while careers collapsed behind her. She checked the time. 5 minutes. Inside, panic broke containment. Chairs scraped. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. "You approved this. You told me to. I want a lawyer." Rachel raised her phone again. The room fell silent instinctively. Power recognized power. Effective immediately, she said, voice carrying through the speakers, "Brian Whitaker is terminated for gross negligence. Thomas Hale is terminated for breach of fiduciary duty. Linda Parker is placed on administrative leave pending investigation." Brian lurched to his feet. "You can't fire me like this," he said, stumbling toward the door. "I have a contract." Rachel turned slowly. "Your contract," she said, "has a clause you should have read more carefully." She nodded once. 2 men appeared at the edge of the lounge, moving with purpose. Dark suits, broad shoulders, eyes alert. Private security. Not airport, not police. Something quieter. More expensive. Brian backed away from the glass. "This is illegal," he said, voice breaking. I have a family. My wife is pregnant. Rachel stepped back toward the door. The glass slid open with a soft hiss. The smell of fear inside the room was immediate, metallic, sharp. She walked in. The sound of her shoes on the carpet was the only thing anyone heard. She stopped in front of Brian. He looked smaller up close. The arrogance gone. The entitlement stripped bare. "You told me to wait outside," she said quietly. "You told me this room was for people who sign checks." She leaned in, just enough that he could hear her breathe. "I signed them all." He broke then. "Please," he said. "I didn't mean it. I just thought you were poor Rachel, finished." He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I thought you didn't matter." Rachel straightened. Her voice was calm, steady, final. "You thought wrong." She turned to the men behind her. "Escort them out," she said, "through the main terminal." Brian shook his head wildly. "Not there," he begged. "Please, the back way." Rachel didn't look at him. "No." The security team moved. Efficient, professional. Brian was lifted, guided, half-dragged toward the exit. Thomas followed, stunned, silent. Linda stumbled behind them, eyes glassy. As they emerged into the terminal, heads turned. Phones rose. Whispers spread. A disgraced procession in plain sight. At the check-in counter, a young woman froze mid-keystroke. Tiffany, the agent who had snapped her gum and looked through Rachel like she wasn't there. She watched as Brian was led past in handcuffs, his face swollen, unrecognizable. Their eyes met. Brian's were pleading. Tiffany's were empty. Rachel stopped at the counter, rested her hand on the smooth white surface where Brian had leaned earlier, invading her space. "Tiffany," she said. Tiffany jumped. "Yes, Mum." "You're not fired," Rachel said. Relief flooded her face. Yet, Rachel added, "You're on probation, retraining, starting tomorrow baggage claim, lost and found. Basement level." Tiffany's shoulders sagged. "I understand." Rachel nodded once. "Learn humility," she said, "or you'll join him." She turned away as sirens wailed outside. Brian screamed as the police took him. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "Do you know who I am?" Rachel watched him go, rain streaking the glass behind him. "We know exactly who you are," she said softly. "That's the problem." She reached for her phone again. "Call the press," she said. "Tell them the acquisition is complete." The terminal buzzed. Somewhere overhead, a plane lifted into the grey sky. Rachel Coleman didn't look up. She had already moved on. The applause never came. That was the first thing Rachel noticed. No cheering, no dramatic gasp. Just the low, uneasy murmur of a terminal that had witnessed something it didn't fully understand, but would never forget. Camera flashes popped anyway. Habit, instinct, a reflex baked into modern America. People recorded because recording made them feel safe, like proof could protect them from being next. Rachel walked through it all without slowing. Her posture didn't change. Her expression stayed measured. Not triumphant, not cruel, controlled. She had learned long ago that real power never rushes. It lets the world catch up. Outside, the rain came down harder, fat drops splashing against the pavement as police vehicles pulled away with Brian Whitaker in the back seat. His voice faded into the distance, still protesting, still clinging to the identity that had just been ripped from him. Inside the terminal, Tiffany sat very still at her counter, hands folded, eyes fixed on the screen in front of her, typing as if her life depended on each keystroke. Rachel's phone buzzed. Press notification, internal comms, regulatory acknowledgement. One after another. A cascade. Michael Ross appeared at her side without ceremony. Mid-50s, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair dusted with grey. a man who looked like he had been built for hard decisions and long nights. "Perimeter is secure," he said quietly. "Local police are cooperating." FAA confirmed receipt. Rachel nodded once. "Good." They moved toward the exit together, past the glass doors and into the covered drop-off zone. The rain cooled the air, washed the smell of recycled oxygen from her lungs. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Just a breath. Not a relief. Focus. A reporter broke free from the crowd, microphone outstretched. "Ms. Coleman," she called, "did you really buy the airline because a manager was rude to you?" Rachel stopped. The question hung there, crude and tempting, a sound bite waiting to be fed. She turned slowly, meeting the reporter's eyes. "I didn't buy it because he was rude," she said. "I bought it because he showed me who he was when he thought I didn't belong." The reporter opened her mouth to ask more. Rachel didn't wait. She got into the waiting SUV. The door shut with a soft, expensive thud. The world outside blurred as the vehicle pulled away, tires cutting through rain-slick pavement. Inside, silence. Michael watched her in the rearview mirror. "You okay?" he asked. Rachel looked out the window. Planes taxied in the distance, their lights cutting through grey mist. "I'm clear," she said. "That's different." Her phone vibrated again. This time the number wasn't saved. No name, no identifier. Unknown. She stared at the screen for a beat, then opened the message. "You made a lot of noise today." "That's dangerous." Her jaw tightened. Michael saw the shift immediately. "What is it?" Rachel didn't answer right away. Another message appeared, uninvited, like a hand on her shoulder. The airline wasn't failing by accident. You didn't buy a company. You bought a crime scene. The SUV hit a pothole. The jolt was sharp enough to pull her back into her body. Michael swore under his breath. Who sent that? Rachel typed nothing. She read the words again, slowly, letting them settle. Letting instinct sort them from fear. She had learned to trust that instinct. It had saved her more times than security ever could. "Change of plans," she said. Michael frowned. "We're headed to the hotel. Secure. Press blackout." Rachel shook her head. "No. Take me to Hangar 4. Michael glanced at her in the mirror, disbelief flashing across his face. "That's isolated. Old maintenance bay." "If this is a threat, it's not a bluff," Rachel said. "It's a warning." She looked down at her phone, then back out at the rain. Brian was loud, sloppy. He liked being seen. Whoever sent this didn't. Michael was quiet for a moment. He knew her well enough not to argue when her voice went like that. Low. Certain. "All right," he said. "But I'm bringing the team." The convoy turned, veering off the main road and onto the service route that ran along the tarmac. Floodlights cut through the rain, illuminating skeletal outlines of planes at rest. Metal giants hollowed and waiting. Hangar 4 loomed at the edge of the field, a massive structure, concrete and steel, its doors streaked with rust and age. The SUV slowed as they approached. The engine idled. The smell hit Rachel first as she stepped out. Jet fuel, oil, cold metal, the scent of machines that had been worked too hard and cared for too little. Inside the hangar, shadows stretched long across the floor. One aircraft sat dismantled at the center, its panels stripped away, engines resting on heavy stands like organs laid bare. "Who's the lead mechanic here?" Rachel called out. A man emerged from beneath the wing, wiping his hands on a rag. Early 60s, weathered face, grease ground into the lines around his eyes. His name tag read, "Miller." "Depends who's asking," he said, voice rough. "Suspicious. If this is about signing off on the fuel pumps, tell Brian is in custody," Rachel said. Miller froze. The rag slipped from his hand and hit the concrete with a soft slap. Rachel stepped into the light. "I'm Rachel Coleman," she said. "I own this airline now. And I want to know what Project Icarus is." Miller stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. He glanced at Michael, at the security team fanning out behind them, then back at Rachel. "You bought this mess," he said slowly. "Then you're braver than most." "Show me," Rachel said. Miller hesitated, just long enough to weigh his options. Then he turned. "You're not going to like it." They climbed the scaffolding together, metal steps clanging under their boots. Miller stopped at an open panel near the fuselage and shone a flashlight inside. Rachel leaned in. The fuel lines didn't run where they should have. They branched, curved, disappeared into a compartment that wasn't on any blueprint she had seen. Miller swallowed. "They told us it was a sensor issue, weight discrepancies," said to ignore it. Rachel reached in fingers brushing cold metal. A secondary tank, welded into the frame, hidden, heavy. "It's a smuggling trap," Miller said quietly. "Extra weight, extra stress. That's why the planes keep failing." Rachel pulled her hand back. "What are they moving?" Miller shook his head. "Not fuel. Too dense. My guess gold. Maybe weapons, high value, non-extradition routes." Rachel straightened. The hangar lights cut out. Darkness slammed down like a door. "Secure the target," Michael shouted. Flashlights snapped on beams slicing through black. At the far end of the hangar, the massive doors began to groan, gears turning. "They're closing us in," Miller yelled. "They cut the power." Rachel's phone buzzed again. "Same number. Told you it was a crime scene." From the shadows above, a slow clap echoed. Deliberate. Mocking. "Well done, Miss Coleman," a smooth voice said. Most people never see this far. A spotlight flicked on from the catwalk, blinding. A man stood there in a pristine grey suit cane in hand. Not for balance, for effect. Rachel squinted up at him. She knew his face. Victor Kane. And suddenly everything Brian Whitaker had ever done made sense. Rachel didn't step back. She lifted her chin. "So you're the real problem," she said. Victor smiled. "And you," he replied, "just walked into it." Victor Kane descended the metal stairs with deliberate slowness, each step ringing through the hangar like a clock counting down. The spotlight followed him, bleaching the color from his face, catching the polished leather of his shoes, the silver head of the cane, tapping once, twice, steady and unhurried. He moved like a man who believed time bent to him. Rachel didn't move. Neither did Michael. The security team tightened their formation boots, shifting shoulders squaring. Flashlights tracked the darkness beyond the cone of light, searching for shapes that didn't belong. "You figured it out faster than I expected," Victor said, voice smooth, conversational, as if they were meeting over drinks instead of standing inside a locked hangar with the power cut. Most people stop at the numbers. They never ask why the numbers don't add up. Rachel's eyes stayed on him. "You hid behind incompetence," she said. "Behind men like Brian who liked to be loud so no one looked past them." Victor smiled thin and precise. "Brian was useful. He scared people. He kept them quiet. When mechanics ask questions, accidents happen. When executives complain, bonuses disappear. You know how it works." Michael took a step forward. "You're admitting to federal crimes." Victor glanced at him amused. "I'm explaining reality. There's a difference from the shadows behind Victor movement." 4 men stepped into the light, spreading out with practiced ease. Submachine guns rested in their hands, muzzles angled downward but ready. Their faces were blank eyes, scanning, calculating distance and threat. Miller sucked in a sharp breath. Jesus. Victor lifted a hand, a gentle gesture. Relax. No one needs to get hurt. Not yet. Rachel felt the temperature in the room drop. Not physically. Something deeper. The moment when a conversation becomes a test. You've made a mess. Victor continued walking until he stood 10 feet from Rachel. The cane stopped tapping. Press. Police. Regulators. That kind of noise attracts attention I don't enjoy. So here's what's going to happen. He leaned slightly on the cane, casual. You're going to sign the airline over to one of my holding companies. For $1. We'll call it a bad investment. You'll go back to your philanthropy. Build hospitals. Feel good about yourself. Rachel's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Recognition. And if I don't? She asked. Victor shrugged. Then you have an accident. Industrial. Tragic. New owner crushed by falling engine component during inspection. Happens all the time. One of the gunmen shifted his grip. The faint click of metal loud in the quiet. Michael's jaw clenched. You think you can just erase her? Victor looked at him again. I think money erases a lot of things. Rachel laughed. It was low. Genuine. It startled everyone, including Victor. The sound echoed off the steel walls, wrong and right, all at once. Victor's smile faltered. What's funny, Rachel tilted her head, studying him, the way she studied failing systems. You think you're the one in control. The words landed without force, without threat. That was what made them dangerous. Victor straightened. I have men with guns. Rachel nodded once. I know. She reached into her pocket. The gunmen reacted instantly, muzzles lifting, fingers tightening. Michael moved half a step in front of her without thinking. Rachel's hand came back out, holding a small circular device. Matte black. No markings. Look up, she said. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then 3 red points of light blinked on high in the rafters. A faint hum filled the air. Mechanical. Precise. It grew louder as 3 micro-drones detached from the shadows, descending slowly, deliberately, forming a loose triangle above Victor and his men. Victor's eyes flicked upward. His breath caught. What is this? Rachel's voice was calm, almost gentle. Surveillance. Shoot them, Victor snapped. I wouldn't, Rachel said. They're military grade, high-voltage tasers, flashbang payloads. And that's not the interesting part. She tapped her phone. Outside the hangar, the massive digital billboard facing the terminal flickered to life. Inside, Victor's phone buzzed. One of the gunmen glanced down at his own eyes, widening. Rachel continued, You're live right now. Every screen in Terminal 4. My channel. 12 million subscribers. They can hear you. They can see you. Victor pulled his phone out with shaking hands. On the screen, his own face stared back at him, spotlight harsh guns, visible behind him. His voice echoed from the hangar, speakers slightly delayed. You're going to sign the airline over, his recorded voice said. Color drained from his face. You recorded it, he whispered. I'm broadcasting it, Rachel corrected. Thousands of people are watching you admit to smuggling gold and threatening to kill me. Sirens wailed in the distance. Faint at first. Growing. Victor's composure cracked. You think this ends well for you, he hissed. You don't understand how deep this goes. I understand exactly how deep it goes, Rachel said. That's why I came here. Victor screamed. Kill her. One of the gunmen raised his weapon. A sharp crack split the air. A drone fired. The taser prongs hit with surgical precision. The man convulsed, collapsing to the floor in a tangle of limbs and metal. Drop your weapons, Michael shouted. The remaining gunmen hesitated. The drone's adjusted red lights locking on. Another taser fired. Another body hit the concrete. The last 2 men dropped their guns. Victor turned and ran. He bolted for the stairs, Kane clattering behind him, breath-ragged now, panic shredding the polish. He reached the top of the catwalk and kicked open the emergency door. Rain blasted in. He burst onto the roof and stopped dead. A helicopter hovered above the hangar spotlight, pinning him to the metal like an insect. Wind tore at his suit, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. A voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Get on the ground." Victor dropped to his knees. The cane slipped from his hand, skittering across the roof. Inside the hangar, Rachel watched the feed on her phone. She swiped the screen, ending the broadcast. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left. Miller sat on the floor back against a tool chest, shaking. "You planned this." Rachel looked at him. "I planned to survive." Michael holstered his weapon, exhaling slowly. "That was risky?" Rachel nodded. "High risk, high reward." FBI agents poured into the hangar, shouting commands, securing weapons, slapping cuffs on surrendered men. The lights flickered back on, harsh and white. An agent approached Rachel. "Ms. Coleman, we have Victor Kane in custody." Rachel met his gaze. "Good." She turned to Miller. "How long to strip those tanks from the fleet?" Miller wiped his face. "With the right crew, 3 weeks per plane. You'll have the budget," Rachel said. "You're the new head of maintenance." Miller stared at her. "You serious?" Rachel's mouth softened just a fraction. Dead serious. Outside, rain continued to fall. Planes taxied. The world moved on. Rachel Coleman walked toward the open hangar doors, shoulders squared, eyes forward. The noise, the danger, the spectacle had burned off, leaving clarity in its wake. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. And the system for once was listening. The hangar smelled different once the noise stopped. Not cleaner, just honest. Oil. Rain. Cold metal cooling after heat. The kind of smell that told the truth about what a place had been used for. FBI agents moved with clipped efficiency. Voices, low boots echoing. Evidence bags appeared. Cameras flashed, but not for spectacle now. For records, for courtrooms, for history that would be argued over in rooms far from this concrete floor. Rachel stood just inside the open hangar doors, rain misting her face. She watched as Victor Kane was escorted down from the roof hands, cuffed behind his back. Suit ruined, head bowed. He didn't look at her. Pride, even broken, still had rules. Michael stepped up beside her. His voice was quiet. "Media is losing its mind." Rachel nodded. "They can have it. They're calling you ruthless." She didn't smile. They always do when a woman doesn't apologize for surviving. A stretcher rolled past with one of the stunned gunmen, strapped down, eyes glassy, jaw slack. A medic checked vitals without comment. Business-like? Professional? No drama. Rachel's phone buzzed again. This time the number was familiar. The Secretary of Transportation. She let it ring twice before answering. "Yes," she said. A pause. Then a voice, measured and careful. "Miss Coleman, this is well. We're aware of the situation." "I assumed you would be," Rachel replied. Another pause. "There will be inquiries." Rachel looked back at the hangar at Miller, speaking with an agent, gesturing toward the exposed fuel lines. "Good," she said. "I have answers." The call ended. She slid the phone into her pocket. Michael watched her for a moment. "You're about to be very unpopular in some rooms." Rachel turned to him. "I've been unpopular my whole life. This just makes it official." They walked back toward the SUV as the rain softened to a steady drizzle. The helicopter lifted off its downdraft, rippling puddles across the tarmac. For a moment, the sound swallowed everything else. Then it faded. The drive back to the city was quiet. No radio, no updates. Just the hum of the road and the occasional flash of lightning in the distance. Rachel stared out the window, mind already moving ahead. Victor Kane would talk. Men like him always did when faced with real consequences. Deals would be offered. Names would surface. Networks would unravel slowly, reluctantly, like old rope under strain. Good. Michael broke the silence. What about the staff? Rachel turned her head slightly. What about them? The ones who weren't complicit. The ones who were just trying to do their jobs. Rachel exhaled. They get protection, whistleblower coverage, counseling, back pay where it's owed. This ends without collateral damage. Michael nodded. He had expected nothing less. By the time they reached the hotel, dawn was creeping up behind the skyline, the city washed, pale and raw. Rachel didn't go inside. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk coat, pulled tighter, watching commuters begin to emerge. Coffee cups, phones, lives restarting. She thought of Brian Whittaker in a holding cell somewhere, adrenaline finally draining, replaced by something colder. Reality. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt closure. Upstairs, she showered quickly, letting hot water pound against her shoulders until the tension eased just enough to think clearly again. She dressed simply. Black slacks, white shirt, no jewelry, no armor. She didn't need it now. Her laptop waited on the desk. She opened it. Emails poured in. Board members from other companies, advocacy groups, regulators. A few quiet messages from people she didn't recognize thanking her. Not for the spectacle, for the standard. She answered none of them yet. Instead, she opened a document labeled Internal Address. She began to type. At 7 a.m, every Aerolux employee received the same message. Rachel watched the red receipts tick up as the sun climbed. She didn't sugarcoat it. She explained the acquisition, the arrests, the violations. She named names where necessary. She acknowledged fear. She promised transparency. She made one thing clear. If you speak up, you will not be punished. If you hide wrongdoing, you will be removed. The responses came back in waves. Shock, relief, gratitude, anger, stories. So many stories. Rachel read them all. By mid-morning, the press conference was unavoidable. The hotel ballroom filled with cameras, reporters, jostling voices rising. Rachel stood behind the curtain, hands resting lightly on the podium, listening to the noise on the other side. Michael leaned in. Ready, Rachel nodded. She stepped out. The room erupted in flashes. Questions shouted. Accusations dressed as curiosity. Praise sharpened into bait. Rachel waited. Silence spread reluctantly, like calm after a storm. I didn't come here to perform, she said, her voice carried without effort. I came here to correct something that should have been fixed a long time ago. She spoke of safety, of accountability, of the quiet damage done when power goes unchecked. She didn't mention Brian. She didn't mention Victor. Their names would be handled by courts. She spoke instead about mechanics who were ignored, about agents who were trained to look away, about customers who were treated as less because someone decided they could be. This company will not survive by pretending, she said. It will survive by telling the truth, even when that truth is expensive. A hand shot up. Ms. Coleman, do you see yourself as a symbol? Rachel considered the question, then shook her head. I see myself as a consequence. The room went still. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed and the adrenaline finally ebbed, Rachel sat alone in a quiet room overlooking the city. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time, from an unknown number. "You won this round." Rachel stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the city noise filter in through the glass. Sirens, traffic, life. This wasn't over. She knew that. Systems didn't change without resistance. People who benefited from rot didn't surrender quietly. But something had shifted. She stood and straightened her sleeves. Outside, a plane roared overhead, climbing into a clearing sky. For the first time in a long while, Rachel watched it without wondering what hidden weight it carried. She turned back to the desk, to the work waiting there. Because fixing what comes next always matters more than celebrating what just fell apart. The first thing to go was silence. It broke quietly at first in hallways and break rooms in the pause before someone spoke and realized they finally could. Mechanics leaned against tool chests and talked in low voices that didn't drop when a supervisor walked by. Gate agents compared notes instead of swallowing them. People who had spent years learning how to disappear began to take up space. Rachel felt it the moment she stepped back into Aerolux headquarters 2 days later. Not applause, not gratitude, something heavier, expectation. The building looked the same. Glass, steel, neutral colors chosen to offend no one and say nothing. But the air had changed. People watched her as she passed, some with hope, some with fear, some with resentment sharpened by uncertainty. Power vacuums always did this. They pulled everything toward them. Michael walked at her side tablet, tucked under his arm. "We've suspended 6 managers pending investigation," he said quietly. 3 resigned overnight. Rachel didn't slow. Good. They're claiming they didn't know. They always do. At the end of the corridor, a young man in a maintenance uniform stood frozen, clutching a clipboard. Early 20s, eyes wide. He moved to step aside, then stopped himself unsure. Rachel stopped in front of him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Evan," he said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Evan Brooks." "What are you working on, Evan?" He swallowed. "Hydraulic checks on the A320 fleet." Rachel nodded. "You find something wrong, you report it. Directly. No chain, no filter." Evan stared at her. "Even if it delays a flight, especially if it delays a flight." Something in his shoulders eased. "Just a fraction." "Yes, Mum." Rachel moved on. Michael watched the exchange. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," Rachel said. "Culture doesn't change through memos." The boardroom filled by noon, new faces, interim appointments. A few veterans who had survived by keeping their heads down. Rachel took the seat at the head of the table without ceremony. She didn't open with numbers. She opened with a story. "When I was 14, she said my mother worked double shifts at a hospital that cut corners to save money. One night, a generator failed. A patient didn't make it. The report said equipment malfunction." Everyone nodded. Nothing changed. She let the silence stretch. "I don't build companies to repeat that." Some people shifted uncomfortably. "Good. We are grounding aircraft where inspections were compromised," she continued. "I don't care what it costs. Safety is not a variable." A man near the end of the table raised a hand. "Stock price." Rachel cut him off with a look. Not anger. Finality. If your primary concern right now is stock price, you're in the wrong room. No one spoke after that. Across town, in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and regret, Brian Whitaker stared at the wall. The adrenaline was gone now. The anger had burned itself out. What remained was the echo. He replayed the moment over and over, her standing there, calm, watching him collapse. The way she hadn't shouted, hadn't gloated, that was what hurt most. A public defender sat across from him, tapping a pen against a notepad. "They're offering a deal," she said. "Probation, fines, no jail time if you cooperate." Brian laughed weakly. Cooperate with what? She looked at him. Everything. He nodded slowly. The word cooperate tasted like ash. Days passed. Then weeks. Rachel's schedule filled until the hours blurred together. Meetings with regulators, interviews with engineers, late-night calls with insurers who suddenly wanted to talk about ethics clauses. She slept when she could, ate when reminded. One evening she stood alone in the operations center, watching a wall of screens track flights in real time. Green lines arced cleanly across digital maps. No unexplained deviations. No hidden weight. Miller joined her hands, still bearing traces of grease despite the new title stitched onto his uniform. "First plane cleared," he said. "Clean as it should have been from the start." Rachel exhaled. "Thank you." He hesitated. "People keep asking why you're doing all this." She looked at him. "What do you tell them?" Miller shrugged. That someone finally showed up who didn't confuse money with permission. Rachel smiled. It didn't last long. Not everyone adjusted quietly. 3 former executives filed suit. Wrongful termination. Defamation. One went on cable news, face-tight voice, indignant, talking about overreach and mob justice, about how he'd been blindsided. Rachel watched the clip once, then turned it off. Michael found her later. "You want us to respond?" "No," she said. "Let them talk. Noise fades, structure lasts." But noise had consequences. A week later, she stood at a different airport, watching a different terminal wake up. This one smaller, regional, the kind of place where people noticed everything because there was nowhere to hide. She saw him before he saw her. Brian stood near the curb, thinner now, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled. He held a folder under one arm. His other hand shook as he lit a cigarette. Rachel didn't change direction. She didn't speed up. Brian looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between them. He dropped the cigarette, crushed it under his shoe, straightened as if habit might save him. "Ms. Coleman," he said. His voice was smaller than she remembered. Rachel stopped a few feet away. "Brian." "I wanted to say." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't know who you were." Rachel studied him. The dark circles under his eyes. The way his confidence had eroded into something brittle. "You knew exactly who I was," she said. "You just decided it didn't matter." He flinched. "They're blacklisting me," he said. "No one will hire me." Rachel nodded. "Actions have consequences. I built that region," he said. Desperation creeping back in. "I made that airline money." "You extracted value?" Rachel replied. "You didn't build anything." Brian's mouth opened, closed. He had nothing left to argue with. "I hear you're restructuring," he said finally. "New positions?" Maybe there's something I could..." Rachel shook her head. "No." The word landed clean. She turned away, leaving him standing there with his folder and his excuses. As she walked toward her car, she felt the weight of it settle. Not guilt, responsibility. The knowledge that fixing a system sometimes meant breaking the people who refused to change with it. Back at headquarters, the final report from the FBI came in. Charges filed. Networks mapped. Victor Kane's empire began to unravel thread by thread. Rachel read the summary once, then archived it. That chapter was closed. The next morning she stood in the hangar again. Sunlight streamed in through the open doors, illuminating freshly painted markings on the floor. New procedures, new standards. She watched a plane roll out engines, humming steady and true. A mechanic nearby wiped his hands and smiled at her. Not in awe, not in fear, in recognition. Rachel nodded back. The work wasn't finished. It never was. But for the first time, the system wasn't pretending anymore. And that she knew was how real change began. The backlash didn't arrive like a wave. It crept in. Quiet. Methodical. The way systems protect themselves when exposed. Rachel felt it first in the delays. Permits that should have taken days stretched into weeks. Meetings postponed without explanation. Emails returned with polite language and empty answers. No one said no. They just stopped saying yes. Michael noticed too. Someone's leaning on the process, he said one evening, standing in her office, as the city lights flickered on outside. I'm tracing it, but it's layered. Rachel nodded, eyes on the window. It always is. The news cycle shifted tone. Headlines softened, then sharpened again. Less about safety, more about power, about whether one person should have that much control, about whether her actions had gone too far. Pundits argued over her motives like they were stock tickers. She's dangerous, one said. Unpredictable. She's necessary, another countered. Rachel watched none of it. What she did watch were the internal metrics, incident reports rising. Not because things were getting worse, but because people were finally speaking. Mechanics flagging issues without fear. Gate agents documenting abuse instead of absorbing it. The system raw and imperfect, beginning to breathe. One afternoon, Tiffany knocked on her door. She looked different. Hair pulled back neatly. No gum. No phone in hand. A binder tucked against her chest like armor. You asked to see me, Tiffany said. Rachel gestured to the chair across from her desk. Sit. Tiffany did. She perched on the edge posture, straight eyes alert. I'm halfway through the retraining program, she said. Baggage claim. Lost and found. And Rachel asked. Tiffany hesitated. I didn't realize how invisible I'd made people feel. How easy it was. One look, one word. Rachel studied her. Not judging. Measuring. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Tiffany continued quickly. I'm asking for responsibility. Rachel leaned back slightly. Why? Tiffany swallowed. Because if this place is really changing, it can't just be about firing bad people. It has to be about fixing the ones who stayed. Rachel nodded once. Finish the program, she said. Then we'll talk. Tiffany exhaled relief and determination, tangled together. She stood. Thank you. After she left, Michael stepped in. Victor Kane's attorney reached out. Rachel's eyes hardened. And he wants a meeting. Says Victor has information. Names. Rachel considered. Set it up. Controlled. Recorded. The meeting took place in a neutral office downtown. White walls, no windows. 2 attorneys, 1 recorder. Victor Kane on a screen orange jumpsuit, replacing the tailored suit, confidence dulled, but not gone. You look well, Victor said, smiling thinly. Rachel didn't return it. Talk. Victor's smile twitched. Still direct. I always admired that. Rachel waited. The network is larger than you think, Victor continued. Cargo routes, shell companies, people you sit next to at charity galas. Rachel's gaze didn't waver. Names. Victor exhaled slowly. I can give you some. Not all. Why? Because I want leverage, he said. Honest now. Desperate. Rachel nodded. You don't have any. Victor laughed softly. You think I don't? Rachel leaned forward. You're in a cell. I'm here. That's the leverage. The smile faded. He talked. By the time the meeting ended, Rachel's jaw ached from holding tension. The recorder clicked off. Michael looked at her. This goes high. Rachel stood. It always does. That night the smear campaign began in earnest. Anonymous sources, leaked emails stripped of context, old photos pulled into new narratives, every success reframed as manipulation, every decision recast as ego. Rachel felt the weight of it press in from all sides. She drove herself home for the first time in weeks, hands tight on the wheel, radio off. The city blurred past neon and concrete. At a red light, a man on the corner held a cardboard sign. Need help? Anything helps. Rachel reached into her purse, then stopped. She rolled down the window. What's your name? She asked. The man blinked. Marcus? How old are you? 46, he said. Rachel nodded. She handed him the cash anyway. The light turned green. She drove on. At home, she stood in the quiet of her kitchen city, noise muffled by thick glass. She leaned against the counter, head bowed for a moment. Not exhaustion. Reflection. She thought of her mother, of that generator, of the patient who never got another chance. She straightened. The next morning she called a meeting. Not executives, not investors, staff, mechanics, agents, cleaners, the people who kept the place moving. They filled the hangar, hundreds of them, standing among planes and tools and crates, nervous, curious, some skeptical. Rachel stood on a small platform, no podium, no microphone at first. She waited until the room settled. I know some of you are scared, she said. Her voice carried anyway. I know some of you don't trust me yet. That's fair. She paused, letting it land. This company failed because people were punished for telling the truth. That ends now. She talked about Victor, about the network, about what was coming next, legal battles, public pressure, scrutiny. This won't be easy, she said, and I won't ask you to be brave for me. I'll ask you to be honest for yourselves. A hand went up. A woman in a cleaning uniform, late 50s. What if we speak up and they come for us later? Rachel met her eyes. Then they come for me first. The room went still. Rachel stepped down from the platform and walked among them. No security wall, no distance. You don't owe me loyalty, she said. You owe yourselves dignity. When it was over, people didn't clap. They nodded. They spoke quietly to one another. They stayed. Outside, cameras waited. Rachel ignored them. That afternoon, a lawsuit landed on her desk. Another followed, then another. The cost of change itemized. Michael watched her sign off on legal strategy after legal strategy. You could settle, he said. Quiet it down. Rachel shook her head. Silence is what got us here. As night fell, she returned to the hangar one last time. A plane sat ready at the gate lights on crew preparing. She watched as passengers boarded. Families, business travelers, a child clutching a stuffed animal. The door closed. The engines started. Rachel felt something loosen in her chest as the plane lifted off, smooth and steady, disappearing into the dark. The system was pushing back. Good. That meant it felt the pressure. And Rachel Coleman had learned long ago that pressure applied long enough always revealed the truth. Brian Whittaker learned how quiet the world could get when it was done with you. The first week after his release, his phone stayed silent. No missed calls, no texts asking how he was holding up. Just the occasional notification from his bank, each one colder than the last. Account frozen. Card declined. Payment overdue. He told himself it was temporary, a misunderstanding. He had spent decades believing momentum would always return if he waited long enough. He was wrong. The interviews came first, or what passed for them. Video calls where the smiles tightened as soon as his name was typed into a search bar. Recruiters who started confident and ended apologetic. We've decided to move in a different direction. Cultural alignment concerns. Not the right fit at this time. He began to recognize the pattern. The pause, the look away from the camera, the moment when the past entered the room and took his seat. One afternoon he sat in his car outside a mid-size logistics firm in New Jersey, resume, printed suit, pressed with care that felt almost ceremonial. The lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. A young woman in her 20s greeted him bright and professional. She scanned his resume, typed his name. Her expression changed. She turned the screen toward him without a word. A still image from the terminal. His face, red mouth open, mid-shout. The caption beneath it read, "Wait outside." Brian felt something collapse in his chest. "That was taken out of context," he said quickly. "Too quickly. I was under a lot of pressure. We all say things." The woman closed the folder. "We have a diverse team here," she said evenly. "We don't think you'd be comfortable." He nodded, stood, walked out without shaking her hand. At home, the lights were off. The house felt hollow, without the sound of his wife moving through it, without the small routines he had never noticed until they were gone. A note waited on the kitchen counter, folded once. She had gone to stay with her parents, took the dog, left the ring. The mortgage notice arrived 2 weeks later. By month 3, Brian stopped wearing the suit. It felt like a costume now. He sold the watch at a pawn shop. The clerk turned it over once unimpressed, offered him $50. Brian took it. He moved into a basement studio in Queens that smelled of damp concrete and boiled cabbage. The window faced an alley. He learned the rhythms of the building by sound, footsteps above, arguments through thin walls, sirens at night. He needed work. A handwritten sign in a diner window caught his eye. Help wanted. Dishwasher. Cash pay. He stood on the sidewalk for a long time, staring at it. Inside the kitchen was chaos, heat, noise, orders shouted over the clatter of plates. The owner, Sal, looked him up and down. "You ever worked a pit?" Sal asked. Brian swallowed. "I managed catering logistics for Sal," cut him off. "I didn't ask what you managed. I asked if you can scrub lasagna off ceramic without crying. $12 an hour. No tips." Brian took the apron. The first shift broke him. Steam burned his face. Water scalded his hands. Grease soaked into his sleeves. The line cook barked orders without looking at him. "Move faster. You miss a spot. Don't block the sink." Brian scrubbed until his knuckles split, until his back seized, until the words regional director lost all meaning. 2 weeks later, he stopped thinking about who he had been. Survival replaced memory. The night of the gala arrived without warning. The diner buzzed louder than usual. Private party, airline people. Sal needed everything spotless. Brian stayed in the back head, down praying invisibility still worked. It didn't. The kitchen door swung open. A woman stepped in, well-dressed, composed. She asked for ice. Brian recognized her voice before he saw her face. "Tiffany." She looked different now. Confident. A pin on her lapel. Director of Customer Experience. Her eyes swept the room and landed on him. "Gavin," she whispered. He turned slowly. There was no hiding the apron, the grease, the rag in his hand. "Hello, Tiffany," he said. She didn't laugh. She didn't sneer. She looked at him with something worse. Pity. The door opened again. Rachel Coleman stepped into the kitchen. She wore a dark suit this time. Simple, precise, power without decoration. The room seemed to still around her. Her eyes found Brian immediately. "Brian," she said. He looked at the floor. "Ms. Coleman." Sal rushed over. "Is this man bothering you?" Rachel shook her head. "No. We know each other." She studied Brian for a long moment. The silence stretched thick and heavy. "You look tired," she said. "I'm working," he muttered. "I see that." She paused. "We have an opening at Phoenix Air." His head snapped up. Hope surged, wild and humiliating. "You do?" Rachel nodded. "Janitorial. Third shift. Terminal floors. $15 an hour. Benefits." The hope collapsed just as quickly. "You want me to clean floors?" he said. "It's honest work," Rachel replied, "and we treat people who do it with respect." He shook his head, pride flaring weakly. "I can't." Rachel nodded. "Pride is heavy," she said, "especially when it's empty." She turned to Tiffany. "Ready?" Tiffany nodded, not looking back at Brian. The door closed behind them. Brian stood alone with the sink and the noise and the weight of it all. Outside, a plane roared overhead, climbing into the night. He scrubbed harder, trying to erase the feeling. Some stains never come out. The plane lifted cleanly from the runway, its ascent smooth, unhurried, exactly as it was designed to be. Rachel Coleman watched it through the tall windows of the terminal, hands folded loosely in front of her coat, still on despite the warmth inside. The engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a quiet that felt earned. 6 months had passed since the day she was told to wait outside. Aerolux no longer felt like a company holding its breath. The metrics told one story: fewer delays, fewer incidents, higher morale. But the real change lived in places spreadsheets never reached. In the way mechanics spoke up without looking over their shoulders. In the way gate agents stepped between angry passengers and junior staff. In the way meetings ended with action instead of silence. Rachel didn't call it a turnaround. She called it repair. The lawsuits had thinned. The noise had moved on to newer scandals, newer villains. Victor Kane had taken a deal and disappeared into the slow machinery of the federal system. Names surfaced. Doors closed quietly. Others opened just enough to let light in. Progress like accountability was rarely dramatic once the cameras left. Rachel walked the terminal floor now unescorted, unnoticed by most travelers, rushing past with bags and coffee and lives pulling them forward. She liked it that way. Power didn't need witnesses to exist. At a gate near the end of the concourse, a janitor paused his work and nodded at her. She nodded back. Nothing more. Mutual recognition. That was enough. Outside the airport, Brian Whitaker stood at a bus stop, 3 blocks from the diner jacket, pulled tight against the cold. His hands were rough now, cracked at the knuckles, the skin permanently stained, no matter how hard he scrubbed. He didn't look up when the bus arrived. He stepped on with the others fed the machine. His fare found a seat by the window. As the bus passed the airport, he glanced out and caught sight of a Phoenix airplane taxiing toward the runway. New paint. Clean lines. A logo he recognized all too well. He looked away. Back inside, Rachel entered a small conference room overlooking the tarmac. Michael waited there older somehow, not in years, but in gravity. The board approved the long-term safety fund, he said. No more deferred maintenance. Ever. Rachel allowed herself a small exhale. Good. And one more thing. He hesitated. Employees want to name it after you. Rachel shook her head immediately. No names. Michael smiled faintly. Thought you'd say that. She stood at the window again, watching another plane depart, then another. Each one carried hundreds of strangers who would never know her name or never know the arguments, the threats, the quiet violence of indifference that had once hovered just beneath their seats. That was the point. Rachel gathered her bag and headed toward the exit. There was another meeting waiting, another system that needed attention, another place where someone would eventually say, "You don't belong here." She welcomed it now, because the story had never been about power or revenge or spectacle. It was about what happens when someone refuses to accept the role they're assigned and instead chooses responsibility. Outside, the city moved as it always had, loud, messy, alive. Rachel stepped into it without hesitation. If this story stayed with you, if it made you pause, reflect, or see power differently, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment your thoughts below.